friends, it's Caroline and I am back today for week 12 of Sandy's 13 Frights Before Halloween 2022. Can you believe it has been 12 weeks of this epic collaboration hosted by the amazing Sandy Trefker over at Sandy Trefker Creative Designs and 10 other contributors? I don't need to tell you there's been an amazing amount of content. For today's project, I am going to be doing a bit of a smash or stash project. This adorable tag album is going to use up exactly 1/2 of a 6x6 paper pad. With this left over, we're going to make 2 of these, have 2 sets of these pieces to be able to make more cards, and I will be able to yield 2 of these fantastic tag albums, as well as make 14 total cards out of these remaining pieces. So stick around, folks, because this is going to be great for any season, any style of paper pad you have. If you've got 6x6 paper pads, we're going to be able to smash a part of that stash for you today. For today's project, we're going to be using this entire 24 sheets of the 6x6 Boo Crew collection from DCWV, 3 sheets of 8.5 by 11 black cardstock. This is the 110-pound cardstock by Recollections. This one just happened to come in a 4-pack, where there's 4 different colors in there, but it is not brand specific. I do think that 110-pound cardstock is best, but you do whatever you feel is best. If you want to smash the entire stack like I'm doing today and make 2 of the albums, you'll need 6 of them. For the tags/pages, I am using the Heartfelt Creations album tags and accent set, and I'm using these 2 dies here. One is for the outline of the tag, and the other one is for the matting for the tag. I'm also using some specialty paper that corresponds to the collection I'm using. Obviously, that's specific to this collection. You use whatever works for your 6x6 pad that you're using, but this one just happens to be the purple paper. In fact, I'm just using the scraps from a previous project, and that was from this Recollections pack. And I'm also using some of this gold shimmer cardstock that's also from Recollections. And again, none of this is brand specific. You use what you have on hand, because I am looking at this as a way to sort of get through some of that stash that we've all got. So don't go and buy special things. Use what you've got on hand. To begin, we're going to cut our cardstock so that it is a size that will go through my die cutting machine, but also so that I can get as much as possible out of each sheet. And because the finished tag on this die is 4x6, I'm going to cut these into pieces that are 4 1/4 by 6 1/4. That way I can run them through to cut my pieces. So the first cut I'm going to make is at 4 1/4. And then this remaining piece here, I'm going to cut into 2 4 1/4 inch lengths by flipping it onto the 8.5 inch side. This one I'm going to trim down to roughly 6 1/4. I'm going to do the same thing for the second piece. And then for the last piece, we're going to cut it at 4 3/4. And then this piece, we're going to place it on the 8.5 inch side and cut it at 4 1/4. That's going to leave us with 2 pieces that are 4 1/4 by 6 1/4, and that's just big enough for us to place our die on here. I cut the other ones a little larger. They don't need to be larger. I just like having a little extra room, but as you can see, this one is just perfectly sized here to fit on there. You just have to be a little more careful with it. With the remaining piece that measures 4 3/4 by 8.5, we're going to place it in on the 8.5 inch side. We're going to cut it down to 5. And then we're going to continue to move it down in 1 inch increments, cutting it at 4, at 3, at 2, and at 1. Leaving us with 4 pieces that measure 1 inch wide by 4 3/4 of an inch long. This is for our hinges. And this little piece left over, which is our scrap. Then we're going to get out our scoreboard and we're going to score these 1 inch pieces at 1/2 inch. This is 110-pound cardstock, so you may have to go over it a couple times. We're going to go ahead and score, fold, and burnish all of those. Then set your hinges aside while we move on to cutting out our tags. Bring in our die cutting machine, and using our die, we're going to secure it with some mint tape and cut out all 8 of our tags. Now that we've cut out all 8 of our tags, we're going to take 4 of them, place the others to the side, and on these 4, we're going to glue them together to make a thicker tag. And these 2, thicker versions of our tag is what's going to serve as our front and back cover to our tag album. We're simply going to place glue on, and I'm choosing to place it on what I'm calling the back side of the tag. And what I mean by that is there's a side that once it goes through the die cutting machine that's a little bit rougher on the edges, and the front of the tag is the one that has kind of the more smooth edges around there. So I'm placing the glue all over the back side of the tag here, lining it up wrong side to wrong side of my tags. And I like to just sort of stand them down and using my fingers to kind of line them up. They're lined up at the bottom. I'm going to double check and make sure everything was looking good, and it is. And I'm going to give it a nice firm burnishing all over, careful not to allow it to slip out of placement. I'm going to clean up the glue that has seeped out the edges with a little microfiber cloth here. And then I'm going to slip it under my mat to keep it nice and flat while it continues to dry. I'm going to do the same thing for the other set of 2 that I've got out here. Placing glue on the wrong side and then attaching it to the wrong side of its corresponding tag in the same way. Lining it up, making sure that all of my edges are flush, and placing it under my mat while we continue to work on our other pieces. Next, we're going to use the corresponding matting die to cut out all of our other pieces. There were 24 sheets in this pad. I've already taken out 1 of each. There's 2 of each designs. So I've taken out 1 of each design, which were 12 sheets when I made my prototype. I'm going to take the remaining 12 sheets out now, leaving me with a completely empty pad. I love seeing that. There's nothing like smashing your stash, right? And now from these remaining 12 sheets that we've pulled out, half of the collection, right? We're gonna cut them into 4 by 6 inch strips. Well, actually, since there's this little branding strip up here, I think it ends up being 4 by 6.5. But basically, we're gonna put it in on the 6-inch side at the top with where the branding strip is, and we're going to cut them into 4-inch sections. And we're going to do that on all of them except for the 2 that have the cut-aparts. On these 2, we're going to cut them a little bit differently. On this sheet here that has the cut-aparts, I'm actually going to cut the 4 inches off of it this width-wise, like this. And that's going to leave me these 2 cut-aparts to use as decoration on my album. Now, obviously, if you're using a different paper pad and you have different cut-aparts, take that into consideration. You're just going to have to sort of figure out how that lays out best for you and what you want your design to look like. For me, I'm going to go ahead and cut my 4 inches this way, using this piece for my matting on my album pages. And this piece here, I'm going to trim down for the decorative element that I'm going to place on the front and back cover. For the piece here with the strip cut aparts, I want to lay it out in such a way that the words are going to be able to be seen on my matting piece. And I figured out that the best way for me to do that is to kind of scooch this over here. I've got my top little shoulders here lined up at this top here so that I'm getting a little hocus pocus and the bat in that little top strip. And down here, I'm able to capture both sections of these little sentiments that say too cute to spook. Now, I've cut it off where it says which lives here with her. There's nothing I can do about that, but I think that that's pretty good. So by the way this lines out, it's going to work out just fine for me to go ahead and cut this at the 4-inch mark. I will still have room to position this correctly. I'm going to continue to cut the rest of these at 4 inches in width, positioning the 6 inches at the top with the branding strip at the top. Once I've cut those down, I'm going to take my little 2-inch wide strips and set them to the side. We are going to work on those in just a little bit. And I'm also going to take these two cut aparts that I cut out. They actually measure 1 3/4 by 3, so 1 3/4 inches tall by 3 inches wide. And I'm going to mat them using some of this specialty paper. I've got 2 pieces of the shimmer cardstock that measure 3 1/4 by 2, and I've got 2 pieces of the mirrored cardstock that measure 1 7/8 by 3 1/8. It's basically just going up in 1/8 inch increments on length and width to create the matting effect that I would like to see. I'm going to round my corners, ink my edges, layer them up, and I'll be right back. Once we've glued them together on their matting pieces, I'm going to slip them under my mat as well, just to keep them flat while they continue to dry, and we start working on cutting out our matting pieces. In the same way that we cut out our tag pieces, we're going to cut out our matting pieces. The only difference is I'm going to be a little bit careful to try to center my die on my paper as best as I can. So, you know, I could go all the way to the edge here, but it might look like it's a little bit off. I just think it's more visually pleasing if I can try to center it on any pattern that may be there. For instance, on this paper, I'm trying to line up these crystal balls in the center row here of this, of this die. And so I'm just sort of looking for a similar reveal all around. I'm going to take a piece of mint tape to place over it just to hold it in place, put my top piece on, and run it on through. Now we have our perfectly cut out matting piece, and this is the only waste that we're going to have. I'm going to go ahead and repeat for the remaining 11 pieces, and I'll be right back. Need 2 lengths of ribbon for our closure here, and they need to be anywhere from 10 to 12 inches in length each. And so I've got both of those here. And now it's time for us to retrieve our front and back cover pieces from underneath my mat here. Set our pattern paper matting pieces to the side. And now we've got our front and back cover and our 4 pages that are going to go inside. These are going to get attached with these little 1-inch hinge pieces that we cut and folded at 1/2 inch each. I'm going to set my cover pieces aside for just a little bit longer and begin with our 4-page pieces. And on the front of each of our 4-page pieces, I'm going to attach 4 hinges. I'm going to attach 1 hinge on each one of our pages to the left-hand side of the front here. I'm going to do that simply by placing some glue on this 1/2-inch strip here on one of the 1/2-inch folds here, with the folded piece to the left edge of our page here. I'm just going to line this up centered between the 2 rounded edges here of my tag, making sure that my fold is also along this left edge. Once I get that set where I want it to be, I'm going to give it a firm burnishing, open it up and clean up any glue that may have seeped out of the sides. Close it back up and give it another firm burnishing, and then just make sure if I've got any glue coming out these sides that I'm cleaning it up. Because this is such heavy cardstock, I do want to go ahead and place a couple clamps on here just for a little bit until that glue takes hold right along that edge. And honestly, it's just long enough for me to glue the next piece on. So let's do that again. We're going to take one of our hinge pieces, place glue on one of the 1/2-inch folds here, and then before placing it down, let's pull off our clamps. And I'm going to use the first piece that we glued down as a template for laying down this next hinge here. So I've lined it up so that the bottoms are lined up. I've got it kind of up next to, next to this little hinge here. And I'm making sure that my bottoms are lined up. And then I'm just going to line this up, centering it so that I've got the top and the bottom of this hinge parallel to the top and the bottom of the first hinge that I placed down. And once that's in place, I'm going to give it a firm burnishing. Clean up any glue that may have seeped out. Place some clamps. And move on to the next one, which I can continue to use this as my lineup to align my hinges so that they are top bottom in the same position, you know, at the top and at the bottom as each subsequent page / tag here, because our tags are serving as our pages in this little album. So we've got our glue in place. We line it up, fold side to the left, making sure that it's centered top and bottom with that other one. Giving it a firm burnishing, cleaning up our glue, and placing some clamps on this one. And I'm going to go ahead and continue with the last one here, and I'll be right back. Once we've glued our hinges on the fronts of all 4 of our tag pieces that are our 4 pages, now it's time to glue a hinge on the front of our back cover, or I guess the inside of our back cover. Basically, we're putting it in the same placement as we did on all of the pages. On one of the pieces that is front / back cover, it doesn't really matter at this point. I'm going to do the same thing where I'm sort of standing it up to give me some alignment. Place glue on half of the hinge. Lining up our hinge on the left-hand side, parallel with the hinge that is in the one below. Just so I've got that centered, right? Go ahead and give it a nice firm burnishing, cleaning up any glue that may seep out. And now we're going to place clamps on it as well. Now we're going to begin assembling our album. We're going to take the remaining cover piece. Now this is the one that's doubled up, right? That doesn't have anything glued to it. And we're going to glue it to the front of one of these pages that has an open flap here on the left-hand side. And so we're simply going to do that by placing glue on that remaining 1/2 inch flap. I like to stand them up so that I've got the bottoms lined up, and I'm just feeling with my fingers that they're lined up top and bottom, just the same way I did when I doubled up on that tag to make the front and back covers, right? The only difference is the only place that it's adhering right now is where we've placed the glue on this 1/2 inch flap here for our hinge. So we've got that in place. I'm going to open it up and clean up any glue that may have seeped out. Give it another firm burnishing and clamp these together. So we've got our front cover attached to our first page with one of those hinges. And now we're going to take another one of the hinges, not the back cover. The back cover needs to set aside. We're going to take another one of the pages with the hinges on it, place some glue on that remaining 1/2 inch flap, remove our clamps, and now we're standing it up and we're lining up this to the back side of page 1. So we're attaching page 2 to the back side of page 1. And I'm just making sure that it's perfectly lined up all the way around all the edges. Once it's where I want it to be, I'm going to burnish it. Open it up and clean up any glue that may have seeped out. And then clamp it just long enough for me to get glue on the next hinge piece. And we're going to continue until we've got all of our pages in place and finish with our back cover. Now we've got all 4 pages attached to our front cover. It's time for us to take our back cover, which is this doubled up piece that's remaining with the little hinge on the front of it on the left-hand side. Place some glue on that remaining little flap of our hinge, and then we're going to attach it to the back of our album. So we've got our front cover here. We've got page 1, 2, 3, 4. And we are going to stand this up so that it goes on the back of page 4, making sure that we're lined up all around all the sides. And this is a feel thing. I'm just feeling for it. If I need to, I can kind of press it down so that I've got nice, you know, bottom is lined up. And then we're going to take our clamp it down. I probably should have cleaned up some glue that seeped out, but I didn't, so that's fine. I'm going to clamp that down, and we're going to set that aside for just a little bit. In fact, while that is sitting there, let's go ahead and attach our ribbon to our front and back cover. And I'm just going to grab a little piece of tape here. The distance here from the bottom until this little shoulder here is just over 5 inches. So I'm going to sort of center it here and place down some tape. We're going to peel off the backing of our tape and position our ribbon so that it is centered here between those marks. And about like, let's see, about like that. Take another piece of tape and cover it up. You can go ahead and take off our clamps now. And I do want to check to make sure that I didn't have any glue seeping out around this edge. I did have a little bit, but it didn't stick down to anything, so that's okay. Just kind of clean that up. And now I'm going to place my ribbon on the back cover as well, but this time I'm not really even going to measure it. I'm just simply going to place some tape roughly in the center. And what I'm worried about doing this time is lining the back ribbon up with the front ribbon. I don't really care if it's perfectly centered, you know, in a measured numeric way. I need it to be visually centered, meaning I need it to line up with the one I've already put down. So to, you know, go by measurements doesn't really matter at this point. And put some tape over the back of that. Give it a little burnishing. And now our entire album is constructed, and all we need to do is add our pattern paper and decorate it. I am going to ink my edges because it's just my preference. And to be completely honest with you, the inking of the edges of each of these matting pieces is probably what has taken the longest, believe it or not. And which is to say, it doesn't really take very long. But because I do like to ink my edges in this way, there's a little bit of, you run into a little bit of difficulties here when you get into these notches and these corners. I try to take the corner of the ink cube and sort of rub around it, you know, and fit myself in there just so I can ink around it. You can also take maybe a brush marker and go from the back side, or if you prefer to use more of like a blending brush or something like that to ink them, that's fine too. This is just how I do it. It may take a little longer in this way, but I just don't like those, you know, the core of the paper to show. And normally I try to match whatever the ink I'm using on my edges to whatever the background paper is. And so in this case, I'm using black ink around my edges. And that way it won't be quite so jarring when up against that black paper. I'm going to go ahead and ink all of these edges, and I'll be right back. And once I've inked all of my matting papers, it's time to just start gluing them down in my album. I'm going to select the ones I want for my front and back cover. That's these two here. And then the rest of them, I'm just going to kind of go through and see which ones I feel like correspond to one another for each of the pages. And once I have them sort of lined up where I want them to be, that way I know I'm not going to, you know, forget kind of the order that I want to put them in. I'm just leaving them in there like they are. And we're going to go through and start gluing everything down. Now for my front and back cover, I'm going to go ahead and attach those down. I've retrieved my decorative pieces here, and we're going to then attach those on the front and back cover as well. So I'm going to just remove the backing on my double stick tape, apply some glue, stick it down, and I'm going to go through and do that for all the pages and the front and back covers, and I'll be right back. right, now that we've got all of our pages covered with our matting pieces, I think it's just coming together so cute. And the only thing left for us to do is to go ahead and add some little decorative ribbons at the top of the front and the back cover. I've elected not to put them on the pages. I feel like it's going to add too much bulk and it just really doesn't need it. But because this is a tag album, I thought it really needed some grommets and ribbons at the top of at least the front and back cover to emulate the tags that are the main component of the construction, right? So as you guys all know by now, I like to use my actual grommet tools here. And so I'm gonna locate where I want my centerpiece to be. So I'm gonna take out my tools. I've got my punch tool, my setting tool, the base of my setting tool. I'm gonna need 2 of the washers and 2 of the grommets. I'm going to use my smaller little mat here to place underneath, and I'm going to line this up in such a way that I'm centered here and then sort of eyeballing it. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to line it up with the one below, but you know, I'm getting pretty close-ish. I'm going to hold my punch right in that position, take my hammer and give it about 7 to 10 whacks this time because I'm going through a lot of layers here. That was 10 punches and it seemed to work out perfectly. I'm going to go ahead and remove this piece from the from my hole punch, however, because I did recently glue it and I don't want that to stick inside of there. So I'm just using a little pokey tool to sort of press that out. Once I've got that in place, and I think that's looking pretty good, I'm just going to open this up so that the front and back cover are in alignment with each other. Take a pencil and just mark where that center is. Go ahead and lay this one down. Place my hole punch right on that mark that I just made and give it another 7 to 10 whacks. Remove the center from my hole punch here. Now I'm finished with that tool. And now I'm going to place the pretty side or the finished side of my grommet on the back cover or the front cover, either one that I'm working on first. Set it on top of my setting tool, the base of my setting tool. Place a washer over that, rounded side up. Take my other corresponding setting tool on the top and give it about 7 more whacks. And I can see when I'm hammering this, there's almost a dimple effect that happens, and that's when I know to stop. And so that has set that just perfectly. It's very smooth. There are no rough edges there, and I love the way that looks. Let's go ahead and do the one for the front cover. Again, we're placing it down so that the pretty side is on the front. Set it over the base of my setting tool. Add my grommet rounded side up. Take my corresponding setting tool and hammer away. And that's it. We've now set our grommets. I'm going to go ahead and put these tools away. And I've got some little scraps of some trim here. Let me cut a couple other pieces. I like these spiders. And to begin with, I'm cutting roughly 4-inch long strips for this portion here. And then I feel like we need some purple. And now I'm simply going to take one of each and layer them up and feed them through. I'm not going to loop them through like I usually do because I'm actually going to use, oh wait, not the purple. I'm going to use the purple trim to tie them. But I'm just going to sort of layer these in here, feed them through, and come up to a height that I kind of like there. That's about where I want it to be. Let's go ahead and trim some of these down. They don't need to be quite that long. There we go. I think that looks good. And then I'm going to take the purple ribbon and I'm going to secure it around the base of all of this ribbon and tie it in a square knot so that I've got a nice secure, fastening of these ribbons through that grommet. So I'm just going to tie it overhanded one way and underhanded the other way so that I've got a nice tight square knot. Just like that. And now that's not going to go anywhere. There we go. Go ahead and trim these up as well. And then I'm going to take my lighter and just sear the edges. I know I've said this before, I'll say it again. If you're not comfortable with doing that, you can simply use some glue or some fray check. I did use this on a different piece of trim earlier and it actually caught fire. I just used my fingers to pinch it out. So if that happens, you can do that. You know, but be careful. Here, I'm gonna try to, no, I tried to catch it on fire to show you, but it didn't happen. Anyway, you're just gonna have to be kind of careful with them. I'm just really trying to melt the edges so that they won't continue to fray. But there is, you know, an instance or an application where I think they might actually look pretty good frayed. So if you wanted that look, you know, you could go for that. But I think that looks really great. So now let's go ahead and do them for the back side as well. One last final trimming and then we're done with our album. And I like to go ahead and tie my bow here first. And then I'm going to trim my edges and sear them up so that they don't begin fraying as well. So I'm just going to give it a little angle and another little angle. And I'm using my lighter, but again, you can just use fray check or glue. And there you have it. We have this adorable little tag album, and I'm so happy with the way it turned out. Let's do a quick walkthrough, and then we're going to move on to working on our cards. Look how cute this is. Yeah, I really like it, and I'm glad I didn't go ahead and put the ribbons on each of the pages. I don't think you need it because when you open it up, you see the ribbon from the front and back cover, and that's just the perfect little amount of design element, I think. So I'm really happy with this. Let's move on to using our scraps up and making some fun cards. Now for the cards, we're going to take these little pieces here that we cut off that were 2 inches wide by a little over 6 inches long. They're actually 6.5 inches long because we didn't remove that branding strip. Now, if you remember, we started off with 12 pieces of paper. We trimmed them down to 4 inches wide so that we could use them for the matting pieces for our album here. All but the piece that had this little cut apart section on here. So we went ahead and used that. So for each one of the albums that I made, I had 11 strips remaining. I'm putting them together in twos. So I've already put together the ones from the first album. And as you can see, I just butted them up next to each other and applied some double-sided tape over that seam on the back side. And I was only able to get 5 of them from the first album with 1 remaining. But because I now have 11 from this one, we're gonna come up and it's gonna make a nice coupling. So I'm gonna be able to make 6 more of these sheets here by pairing up our pattern paper. And all I'm going to do is take my pattern paper, we're going to butt them up next to each other on the wrong side, take a piece of some double-sided tape and run right along that seam, just like that. I'm going to cut off any excess that might be hanging over, give it a nice firm burnishing, and then move on to the next one. I'm going to complete the rest of these and I'll be right back. Now that we've attached our pieces together in twos, I'm going to set them aside and we're going to move on to making some card bases. I'm using the Artisan Cardstock in 8.5 by 11 sheets in the color black. It is exclusive to Country Craft Creations and I'll have a link to it in the description notes below, and it just makes the most wonderful card bases. Making A2 card bases is so simple. You just take a piece of 8.5 by 11 inch cardstock, place it in your trimmer on the 11-inch side and cut it in half at 5.5 inches. Then you simply score them in half on the other side. So with the 8.5-inch side at the top, we're going to score them in half at 4.25 inches. And I have made a little mark on my smaller scoreboard because I only use this when making A2 cards. Well, I use it for other things too, but mostly for making A2 cards. And that just reminds me where I need to make my score mark. So I'm going to go through and score, fold, and burnish all of my card bases. I have 14 card bases, and now I'm going to go ahead and start trimming down the pieces that we have attached together. Now, what I want to do is I want to do a matting layer on the cards. These measure just shy of 4 inches by just over 6 inches, 6.5-ish inches. And I'm going to leave the width just as it is, which is on this one, it's just under 4 inches. Some others, it's a little closer to 4 inches. These were roughly 2-inch strips that we cut off. I don't know, some of them are a little short, I guess. And then I'm going to cut this to 5.25. just like that. That's going to give us a 1/4 of an inch reveal all the way around our card base. And if that is how you like to do your cards, leave it like that. You can simply attach it like that. I personally like a more of a scant reveal around the edges of my cards. So I'm going to cut matting pieces to go on these before putting the pattern paper down. I'm going to go ahead and finish cutting all of these, and I'm also going to keep these little cutoffs because we're going to use these to do kind of a scrappy effect on making another card front with them as well. So I'm going to go ahead and trim all of these down and saved all of our cutoffs here. Now it's time for us to cut the matting pieces that are gonna go underneath these. For the matting, I'm going to cut 8.5 by 11 sheets of this gold shimmer cardstock, the remaining bits that I have of this purple mirror cardstock, and I'm gonna cut them down to pieces that are 4 1/8 by 5 3/8 each. So I'll get 4 from each sheet. Once I've cut all of my matting pieces for underneath the pattern paper, now it's time for me to cut some white paper to place inside of the card bases because it's black cardstock and we want something that is going to be easy to write on. So I'm using this Nina 110-pound cardstock. I'm going to cut it down to pieces that measure 4 by 5 1/4. I'll get 4 from each sheet. I cut 16 of the white pieces that are going to go on the inside of the card bases. I only have 14 card bases. So that gives me 2 extra bases to go ahead and make, you know, some card fronts with. So I'm just going to use these pieces here and start laying them out in some sort of a pattern that I like, right? So I'm also going to end up having to trim these down a little bit, but I'm using this as sort of just a base for me to glue these pieces down onto. And I'm gonna try to not put the same, you know, patterns on right next to each other, right? So like I don't want to put these two here next to each other like that, but I might want to do them like this. I'm not sure. Let's continue to lay these out until I can get some sort of a, I don't know, arrangement that I kind of like here. Once I have them looking the way I like, I'm simply gonna take the backing off of the double-sided tape, place some glue on these pieces and start gluing them down. I'm not worried if I have spaces between the sets of papers, but what I am trying to do is I'm trying to line up that center line as best as possible. Once they're adhered down to our cardstock, we need to sort of come up with some sort of strips that are going to cover up these seams that we've got. I personally like to use the Love from Lizi strips, but since some of you don't have them and have asked me, you know, what would you do instead of that? I would just cut some really thin strips of some other, you know, cardstock here, right? So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to take my small guillotine trimmer here and I'm going to be backing it down. Instead of trying to cut like a teeny tiny piece like this, that's not going to work for me. I'm going to place it in here and I'm going to come over 1/8 of an inch and give it a cut. Come over another 1/8 of an inch and give it another cut. Come over another 1/8 of an inch and just keep going all the way down there until I have completed. I'm not going to be able to go all the way down, but maybe somewhere around to the 1.5 inch mark. I should still be able to continue to cut these into 1/8 inch strips. So another 1/8 of an inch, give it a cut. And so on and so forth. And that's going to leave me with these strips here, these sort of decorative strips from the shimmer cardstock. And I can easily lay these over and glue them down, and that's going to help me connect my seams, right? So that's just going to sort of cover those up. I think I'm going to go with the center seam first, and then I'll overlay with the other ones as I go. And all I'm going to do is put a little thin bead of glue right along this strip. And that might be a little more glue than I wanted. I use my finger and kind of smush some of that out. There we go. And I'm going to lay it right down this center strip here. And trying to keep it as straight as possible. That looks a little crooked up there. I think that's looking pretty good. And then I'm going to come over with my cross strips here just like that. And now that I've got all of those in place, I'm simply going to trim up my base to kind of even everything out. looks like I got some glue here along some of this paper and I didn't want it there, so I'm going to use my eraser to sort of rub that back, cleaning that up a little bit. It shows up on the shimmer cardstock as making it kind of look dull. So when you start rubbing that back, it brightens it up a little bit again. There we go. And now we've got another little, you know, pattern paper card base that was just made out of scraps that we're going to get tossed. I'm going to go ahead and do one more with the remaining pieces. All right, now I've got two of my little scrappies here. These are left over. I don't know whether I'm going to be able to do anything with them. I'm going to set them to the side for right now. So far, that's really my only scraps. I feel really good about that. I'm going to use my die cutting machine to cut out a few of these sentiments from Scrap Diva designs that say spooky. And then I'm also going to pull from all of these other ephemera pieces that I made in a prior video. And we're going to use them to decorate our card fronts with. The only thing left to do is to assemble our cards. I'm going to begin by putting the background matting pieces on all of my card bases using my ATG gun. Now I'm going to use some of these left from Lizi peel-offs to go ahead and kind of cover this seam between these two pieces of paper. If you don't have the peel-offs, again, you can go ahead and use these strips that we cut, and we can just place a little bit of glue on the back side of that. Lay it right over the top of that seam, smooth it out, trim off whatever is the overhang, just like that. I'm going to go ahead and do that to the rest of our pattern papers, and I'll be right back. Now the only thing left to do is to go ahead and place our pattern paper on top of our matting on our cards and attach some sort of a sentiment. I'm going to go ahead and glue all of those down, and I'll be right back. All right, folks, we have completely smashed this entire paper pad, and I feel so great about it. I made 14 cards. Check these out. I love the way they turned out. I think it's really fantastic. And this was not my primary project. My primary project was the tag albums, right? But I was able to put together all 14 of these cards. Actually, that's 13. Remember those two little cutoffs I wasn't sure what I was going to do with? Well, I managed to sort of piece together a card there, and I actually like the way it turned out. I put some white cardstock on the inside since the card bases are black. That way we've got something to write on. Look at this little mismatched piece. I think sometimes when you're forced to make something with limited or odd materials, they always end up surprising me on how much I like them. These two have turned out to be some of my favorite ones. This one is definitely in one of my top favorites. And they were just the cutoffs, y'all. They were just the cutoffs. So those are the 14 cards that we were able to make. And we made not one, but two of these adorable tag albums. Let's have a little walkthrough on how they turned out. This was my prototype. This is the one we made together. They're nearly identical. Look how cute they are. They open up with a tie closure here. And then because of the nature of how they are constructed with those hinges, they lay flat every time you open a page, and I just think that's really cool. We didn't put the ribbons on the interior pages, only on the front and back cover, but I just love the way these turned out. And y'all, I used up an entire 6x6 paper pad, and I did so in such a way that this could be formulaic. I could go through my 6x6 stash, making 2 tag albums and 14 cards for each one. How fabulous is that? I hope you all have been checking out all the other contributors on all of their channels. Make sure you're clicking on the hyperlink of that hashtag for Sandy's 13 Frights Before Halloween 2022 so that you can see all of the participants that are kind of hopping in and out week to week as they feel so inspired as well. I did want to point out that I began making this entire project took me just under 6 hours to make everything. And a good chunk of that time was just spent on determining what it was I was going to make. I started this whole project with the intention that I was going to use up the entire 6x6 paper pad, and I'm so happy that I was able to do that. That took a little bit of figuring. It also took me a little bit longer because I made the prototype first before making the second one. If I had been cutting them all at the same time, it would have gone a little bit faster. So just around 6 hours is what I would say. I began this around 1:30 in the afternoon on Sunday. It is now just a little bit past 7. So yeah, this is what I get for sort of waiting for the last minute. I'm super happy with the way they turned out. I hope you guys like them as much as I do. All right, y'all, that's what I've got for you today. I hope you're having a fantastic day. I hope you're being kind to yourselves, and I hope you're finding some joy in your journey. Thanks so much, everyone. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.